Make no mistake that President Trump officially made it to 100 days. That's right, 100 days, not 100 years. And despite what the media says from the left. Now, if we pay closer attention to the debate regarding Donald Trump's performance, and some say that the future of America is going to be detrimental not only to American citizens, but also to the entire world. But on the positive side, and people have been praising President Trump regarding some of the critical issues, such as illegal immigration control, fixing the border crisis, this economic plan, of course, that's rather disputable as well. But meanwhile, when we look at the domestic issue, not only the American citizens are very concerned about the future for the country, but also the citizens around the world, particularly in China. And if you remember back in the days that we tend to believe that those two largest powers can actually fix the world's problems. But right now, both countries, that's right, both China and the US have their own problems to deal with. It's not just about who is the leader right now. It's really about the differences between the noises and the signal within the political parties. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to invite our distinguished speaker. Again, it's our good old friend, Dr. Michael Patrick, and he's a well-known journalist, and he traveled extensively, and also he's a scholar on teaching leadership. Well, Michael, and welcome back to The Missing Piece.
Well, thank you, Will. It's always good to see you.
Well, Michael, I want to get started. Again, as we mentioned before, President Trump just officially made it to 100 days. And I remember last time you and I, we had the conversation, there was a possibility that if everything were to go well, and President Trump could have gone to China, to soften or even perhaps to have this beneficial dialogue between the two leaders in China and the US. But when I prepared for this interview, one article came to my mind and written by Peggy Noonan, and who was a former speechwriter for Ronald Reagan. Now, this is what she wrote, and it's quite interesting. I want to get started based on her content. The article entitled, "When Establishments Fail, Trump 100 Days. America's continued divided into two groups. One thinks he's something that happened to us, or the other one thinks he's something that we did." So, Michael, I don't want to put you on the spot, but what do you think? I mean, I think we've been listening to the rhetoric so long from the left and the right, whether this country is currently divided or not. So do you think, based on the two statements, whether Trump is something that we did, or Trump is something that just happened to us? What do you think?
Well, you're right in that the country is divided. And depending on who you listen to, legacy media controls maybe as much as 90% of the messages that people see in terms of the press. We have all kinds of other ways, alternative media, and ways of finding out what's actually happening. I think most people would admit to being a little surprised how deep into the woods he is on both the international front and domestically. And of course, tariffs are a whole issue in and of themselves, both internationally, but also in terms of domestic impact. So he's accomplished a lot of different kinds of things in this 100 days. He's certainly started a great number of brush fires. It's one thing to start a fire, it's another one to put it out. And he's learning along the way. So, but he brings a previous administration of experience to this. So this is Trump 2.0. It's a little different than the first time around. And so we're watching and waiting and anticipating what kinds of moves can be made in all sorts of places around the world, as well as in the United States. And to see exactly what his legacy is going to be, he's just getting started. And there's a lot of things right now that will implicate 4 years from now. So that won't be completed. So this is an interesting. We're on a roller coaster ride. You know, it's like you ever have one of your kids haul you on a ride, and you start on the ride and you had no idea what was going to happen, and suddenly you're up and down and sideways, and you weren't quite prepared for it. That's kind of how I think a lot of voters are. Is they're trying to remain optimistic, but this is an unusual and somewhat unexpected ride for a lot of people. But it is a divided culture, and that's absolutely true.
Michael, when we talk about the roller coaster ride under President Trump, another cliche that came to my mind is you must be familiar with the movie called The Forrest Gump. And we know that one of the most classic lines is life is like a box of chocolate that you never know what you're going to get. Now, I want to go back to what you just talked about, this roller coaster ride under President Trump. There's no denying that for people who did not vote for Trump and surely understood what happened in 2016, and they did not want the same thing to be repeated in 2024. But for the voters who actually voted for Trump and had faith in Trump, to borrow the phrase from Forrest Gump, is they actually knew some of the games that Donald Trump would play. So it's not a box of chocolate that you never know what you're going to get. It's actually fulfilled the promises that Donald Trump made during the campaign and to the engagement with the voters. But here's another question that's so crucial. From the political standpoint, or even from the presidential legacy standpoint, why do we always tend to pay attention to the first 100 days? I mean, we understand the first 100 days are rather crucial, but for Trump or for any president, on one side, it's the domestic issue. On the other side, it's an international crisis. And no one can solve any problems within the first 100 days. Why are the medias are going crazy on the first 100 days, even though they know, or even though we know, that some of the projects or some of the issues are going to take months or even years to get it done? What do you say to that?
Well, one of the first things Donald Trump did was set out to drain the swamp in D.C., and that involves billions of dollars, if not trillions of dollars. And so a lot of the people that you're hearing reflected in the media is a bit of a skewed message. It's not the complete message. And so what most people are hearing is the media would tell you that people are very dissatisfied with what Donald Trump has been doing. This morning, I listened to a leader in the United Auto Workers in Michigan, in Detroit, where auto parts this week were hit with a bit of a tariff, and that's going to unfold, a tariff for imported auto parts. And instead of being highly critical, he was saying, look, when we voted for Trump, we knew it was going to be some surprises, and we're still with him. So I felt like listening to him, he was only one voice there in Detroit and in Michigan, but it's a cross message in a lot of different ways. I think people have started to change their mind about Donald Trump dealing with Ukraine. Once that minerals deal was sealed just days ago, it sent a message to Russia. And Russia's been playing a lot of games. They hit Kharkiv this week and killed a number of innocents. And so Donald Trump is waking up to the fact that Russia's not an honest broker in trying to come to a peace agreement. That seems to be relatively new. He may have known that before, but he had been trying to give Russia some leg room, some way to move and to join this process. Russia's not been joining the process. So I think Trump's learning some things, but we're seeing progress on several fronts right now, and including with China. I think that we've begun to see some movement on China, and those talks that you and I said that were going to take place. I haven't changed my opinion on that. I think they're positioning themselves to be ready for those talks. And it may take a month or two before that really kicks in. the last shipment of goods that left China was about 3 weeks ago. They're just starting to arrive now in the United States, and over the next 2 or 3 weeks, they'll arrive. And then the United States pretty much has all it's going to have. And we're going to see some shortages take place. I think once the reality kicks in of what this is all about, and China has its own challenges going on right now. So I think that give it another few weeks here, and we're going to see that both of them motivated, I think, for their own particular reasons to start increasing the seriousness of these talks.
Michael, before we talk about China, one more thing I want to get your opinion of. Of course, this is another major topic as well, that AOC and Bernie Sanders, and they've been hitting the road across the nation to start this campaign. It's called Fight the Oligarchy. I mean, I have to be honest, Michael, before paying attention to those two wonderful human partners, I did not quite understand the word oligarchy. Of course, when you listen to Bernie Sanders talk, you always get this sense of anger, this frustration. You know, it's similar to listen to a song written and sung by Eminem. But when you listen to AOC, and you got this whole, the tone of hope and the tone of demand changes. As a matter of fact, because of their presence a few days ago, nationwide, that we've seen protests across the spectrum towards President Trump or towards the Trump administration. From your experience and from your years of coverage, does it work actually for American people to join such movement, able to ask for changes? And also, along with that question, people are still talking about the hopes for 2028, especially for the Democrats. Couple names are still been thrown in the ring. AOC, or even the former Vice President Kamala Harris, and also they talk about the Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro. I mean, again, the name just went on and on and on. So, what is the ultimate purpose for Sanders, for AOC, for all the Democratic Party to join this Fight the Oligarchy movement in order to generate the noises? What do you think of that?
Well, the particular players you mentioned, to me, they're kind of driving the clown car right now. I honestly don't think that the public is ready to listen to them. I think by fall of this year, we'll start to see some real movement in the Democratic Party as it begins to identify the messages that they carried before aren't going to come back and work. They're not. It's not like suddenly they can dust off Kamala Harris's message and resell it. I think they've got to reinvent them, fresh leadership. But I think that's quite possible that we could see a strong Democratic Party arise in this situation. And let me just use Canada as an example. Who would have expected that Canada would have re-endorsed its previous party? It looked like they were going to have a new person step into the ring, a new prime minister, and instead they kind of doubled down on the old system. That was a surprise for a lot of people. I think that there is a real challenge here for Trump and the Republicans to really start delivering on some things. And the first 100 days is all, this is all cake and champagne. They've really got to kind of double down and deliver on some of these things. I think Ukraine is changing. People are realizing Europe already does not trust Putin. There's a lot of decisions going on within Europe that signal they don't trust Putin at all to live up to any kind of a peace agreement. But they are taking more responsibility. I live in Lithuania. We had German soldiers come into Lithuania because they're concerned about what Putin's next moves may be. I think we're seeing movement in Europe to prepare to deal with Putin. And Putin's got his hands full. And so does Trump in terms of trying to sell a deal. There's a talk about whether or not they're going to take 3 days worth of peace here, stop shelling civilians. We don't know whether that's going to hold or not. I'm just saying that I think the Democratic Party has time to develop itself. By fall, we'll start to see some movement. We may start to hear some new faces. I really don't think the old clown car, as it were, is going to work. They're going to have to come up with some new messages, new faces, and take some cues from other parts of the world where new faces have arisen and move forward.
Michael, I want to shift our topic to another domestic issue, and then we can talk about China that related to college tuition. And there's no surprise, and there's no denying that today the college tuition it's increasing drastically. And of course, that could be a reason, or that could be a good reason for a lot of young people to walk away from pursuing higher degree, and mainly they do not want to shoulder the responsibilities of paying the college and also live with the bankruptcy, or they have to borrow the money from the bank, and that will create the whole issue with the student loans. But the Wall Street Wall Street Journal, the editorial board came out with a opinion piece. It's called "The End of the Free College Lunch." The GOP begins to rein in students' loans and the forgiveness plans. In the article, this is what the opinion says, and I quote, "A report last week by the Bureau of Labor Statistics found the unemployment rate for recent associate degree recipients in their 20s was 2.1% compared to 15% for four-year college grad and 8.4% for advanced degree recipients. One thing we have to make clear, you have a higher chance of being unemployed these days if you go to college." Michael, there's no surprise that as someone who successfully graduated from a university with a bachelor degree, with a master's degree, I'm very proud of the accomplishment that I made. But these days, how do we understand, or what is your reaction when people argue to say that if you go to college, even though you get a college degree, there's still a good possibility that you can be unemployed? And also, you have to think about the student loans that you have to pay after graduation. What do you think?
Well, the AI is not insignificant in this role. I think that if you're Gen Z, the odds are at least 1 in 7 that you will be unemployed as jobs are dislocated, as things change. And so it's a particular problem. I think we pay too much attention on the debt carried by the students in the past generations. And yes, that's significant, and we need to be able to address it in all sorts of ways. But what we really need to be looking at is the cost of delivering higher education. It's ridiculous. Higher education is way back in the pack in terms of the kind of reforms that they could make to deliver education much more expediently, much more quality, much less cost. There's all kinds of things that could be done in higher education, but it's actually running off the cliff in terms of the costs of delivery of higher education. It's a very wasteful process. I think we're going to see things like AI and other kinds of new models coming into work that are going to change higher education significantly, and in the process make it more affordable for students to be able to go and get the skills they need at far less cost. I think that the general reform of higher education should be the center of attention in terms of what we're concerned about, not simply trying to help students to afford a ridiculously expensive education and then walking out to face the risks of AI and the changing marketplace, which is changing radically. And I'm speaking specifically about Gen Z.
Michael, two more questions. Let's talk about China. I mean, again, you and I, we had countless discussions regarding the trade war between US and China. Last time you and I, we talked that President Trump placed 125% tariffs on China, and China responded by putting 145% of tariff on the US commodities. And of course, at this moment, we're still seeing this heavy competition between the two countries. Throughout the entire week, when I paid attention, or should I say closer attention, to the state media and also to the scholars from the Chinese side reacted or commented on the trade war, one thing that stuck with me is one particular scholar, remain nameless, that delicately he mentioned that China, think about for the past 5,000 years of history, China progressed a little by little, but without the help of the US. At the bottom line, the scholar or the speaker made was, we don't really care about the tariff war. We don't really care about how Donald Trump treated China at this moment. You know, if we listen to that rhetoric from a non-political perspective, that sounds very much patriotic. So in other words, that could resonate with a lot of businessmen in China, a lot of average citizens in China. But put in this political sense, this I don't care or we don't care attitude cannot really fly by that easily. I mean, ultimately, there is room, or there will be room for US and China to collaborate. But right now, it's only momentous, it's only temporary. But why do you think that such attitude we're seeing continue to get spread out from the US side, from the Chinese side, regarding this, we don't care, we need to do what we do, without each other, we can survive. I want to hear your take on that.
Well, let me just start by saying one thing that has happened in the United States with the cutoff here, as it were, of all of this resources coming into the United States. We've gotten the cart before the horse a little bit, to borrow a phrase someone else used on this, in that we had not prepared to do a lot of our own manufacturing. We had not built the kind of industrial base that we needed if suddenly we were going to start creating the things that we need here in the United States. So in a way, we're still dependent upon somebody, and that somebody is China, which has this huge industrial capability going on. And so when we look at that, the United States, as a general population, I think we talked about tariffs, and tariffs are a technical thing that you have to be, and most of us aren't really tracking those numbers as carefully as we might. But another way of looking at it is to look at it from the point of view of consumption. Americans consume about 70% of the things that they need on a regular basis beyond food and that sort of thing. We're a heavy consumer culture. China is probably about 35%. So when the United States stops consuming what it's doing, maybe 20% of the output of China comes into the United States. When the U.S. has to start coping with those losses, it has an impact on workers in China as well. Because even though there might be a desire to see the Chinese population consume more, due to the finances and all of that, which we don't need to all get into, but they've only taken up about 35% consumption. So this is a real strain on the industrial model within China. Now, all of the evidence is suggesting that President Xi is in the process of reinvesting and finding ways to actually use more money, draw more money in to build up and maintain the employment in China. But this is a struggle for both countries. And what they need to do is to get together and talk about how do we get the consuming we need within our own countries and afford to do that within our own countries. So this is there needs to be a rebalance. Tariffs is a good discussion, but that's very technical. Consumption is something that people might be able to understand. I don't think there's an easy drive out of this dilemma for either the Chinese or the U.S. And I think that that's what will eventually, as the populations are run, there's nothing left in the United States. The ships have stopped coming, okay, and bringing goods to the U.S., and there starts to be shortage everywhere. In China, the goods can stack up on the dock because there's no place to sell them. All of these things begin to create pain for the leadership in a concrete way, and they can be kind or they can be belligerent. That doesn't change the harsh realities, the math. So I think as we get these leaders another month or two, and they'll both start saying, okay, all right, yes, there is room for us to chat here. There's room to talk, and we can improve the life and the lot in both countries. And I think that's where you were absolutely right when you said that they will be talking. I couldn't agree more. The question is when, and I don't think that happens this week. I think this happens when reality kicks in on both sides.
Michael, I want to wrap up our conversation. Again, let's talk about another aspect that actually bridge China and US together is what we call the international talents. Regardless what's happening in the political world, and regardless is economic disagreement between US and China, by serving the friends around me, by looking at the outlook for the entire country, US is still the most ideal destinies for higher education, particularly for the Chinese younger generations. I mean, again, if we go to the American embassies in Beijing, every day, I promise you, Michael, we can see people applying for visas and going to the US, and majority of the applicants are actually going because academic interests or belief that universities, colleges in the US are able to make the dream come true. And vice versa. President Xi Jinping has been very vocal during the Biden administration that inviting American students also come to China to know the country, to know the culture, and to deepen the friendship between the younger generations. From your perspective, you taught in both countries, and you are very knowledgeable about the culture and the history and the relationship part, particularly when we talk about that this engagement, not decoupling, not de-risking, but the deep, meaningful engagement from the academic level. So the last question I want to ask you, Michael, is how important it is for both countries continue to send or continue to encourage younger generations to go to the countries to study, not just study the subject, but also study the culture, the history, the language, and the people-to-people relationship. They might not be able to solve the trade war in 24 hours, or maybe perhaps in 24 months, but there's a good possibility that through the power of the younger generations, the tension could be de-escalated somehow. Your final thoughts.
I agree with you 100%. Yesterday, I watched students from 60 countries get up as just a slice of what could be, and they spoke in 23 different languages on the stage as they wrapped up their graduation. They are a testament to the fact that we have a world that's very complex. It's going to be very interactive. I think the reforms in higher education are going to encourage this, where we begin to see people come together. And we know that amongst the student, that 60 countries, many of them they come from countries where their governments don't agree. Their governments don't get along. But we've seen a miraculous cooperation among those students. And those 23 languages, they found ways to work around all of that and to find commonalities. And I'm 100% in agreement with you. I think that that's actually one of the paths to creating affordable education as well. Education can be local, but it can also be international. And we can develop new methodologies of education that doesn't put students into ridiculous debt and that in fact increases our global participation among students. And I've seen it. I've seen it in the students. And so I believe, and China is, of course, was a magical kind of effort for me to be able to meet so many incredible people. I'm really a believer in that that's the way forward.
Well, again, Michael, to borrow a phrase or a sentence from the former British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, and you and I, we had this brief conversation before taping the show, that Winston Churchill once said, America always knows how to do the right thing when they exhaust all the possibilities. Again, right now, we don't really understand what will happen to US and China, not only for the US, but also for China as well. And again, I'm a believer that before both sides exhaust all the good possibilities, and I believe there will be a good opportunity for both sides to re-engage, to reopen up the dialogue. Because at the end of the day, when we are seeing the war in Israel, we're seeing the war in Ukraine, and also the conflicts around the world, the last thing that we need today is to see two major powers are going head to head against each other. And that's not going to be a pretty picture. And also, like you and me, you're on the side in Lithuania, you're teaching, but you always bring this fresh perspective from the American side. And me as a Chinese national, and I tend to offer my insights. So I think because of the dialogue and the conversation that we have, that's how the world continue to move on, continue to grow. It's not by the power of competition, it's by the power of engagement. So again, Michael, thank you so much for taking your time. It's been a great pleasure, and we'd love to have you back on the show. Again, hopefully next time we talk, things will be better between US and China. We'll see a better solution for the war in Ukraine. And also, hopefully, the economic situation around the world will become better as well. So thank you so much for doing this.